To the curious, the seekers, and the experts, welcome. You're listening to Poli-Psych Podcast. There is a lot going on, and we wanted to hit a lot of topics sort of quickly. So we are recording this show, and in the course of this show, we will be talking about, of course, coronavirus and some of our perspectives. And we will be mentioning the progress or lack thereof of Joe Biden's campaign, and also looking at what's been happening in the financial markets. I think that we're going to begin with some comments from Ken about the virus.
But I guess the virus is topic number one these days. It's pretty hard to avoid it. And all the things that, every 5 minutes we think of something that probably won't be quite the same again. I was thinking yesterday, cash, coins, restaurants we've already sort of written that off, but I don't think this will continue forever. And here's why. The virus itself is contained, I'm firmly convinced, and there are some scientists on Twitter that I'm trying to rope in and get to talk to me. They haven't yet, but there is definitely scientific proof that the virus travels in water vapor. And we covered this in another show. The Earth's atmosphere has constant pressure of 14.7 psi that we can't feel, so we're not as aware of it. Everybody talks about sneezes and coughs, but the average human exhales a fairly large amount of water vapor just in the normal activity of breathing, which is another thing we're not really aware of most of the time unless you're into meditation, which I guess is the mind wanders anyway, so that's how that goes. So we at Poli-Psych Podcast don't discount the dangers at all. We just don't know. The prevailing attitude is starting to come around a little bit, and we had yesterday Dr. Shiva, he casts himself as the real Indian, running against Liz Warren in 2020 for the Senate seat. And he's been pushing back on, and he's using the term deep state, which is becoming almost a common term at this point, as opposed to about 2 years ago when Dr. Corsi and a few other people were rolling it out. And it's no longer regarded as a conspiracy theory. It's really assumed its own identity as a term, as a technical political term. But we normally would see, Cindy will put this visual up of the count. Let's see where it is right now. It's about 2 p.m. Eastern time on Friday, the 27th. And let me call mine up here. It says, we always list cases, deaths, and recovered. Cases are at 94,000, deaths 1,429, recovered 2,447. And there are fallacies built into all three. First of all, the cases would be, I'm assuming that would be confirmed tests. And the fallacy would be in any given volume of water vapor, there have to be just thousands or maybe even millions of other substances and pathogens and antigens and comet dust or whatever contained in water vapor. And even water itself is not really just water. It's a combination of dissolved gases and other things that sort of blend in, and in our minds, or at least in the media's portrayal of reality, they separate those things into mutually exclusive categories. So you have air and water and all these conceptual frames of reality. But in the coronavirus case count, I'm just wondering if you took a random sample of indoor humidifier produced water, liquid form, and tested that for coronavirus, I don't know, but there's a chance that would also test positive for coronavirus, the cold virus, 60 other viruses that are cataloged by the WHO, but they're focusing on this one thing as a mutually exclusive category. The problem I have with the deaths count, unfortunate as it is, there are no secondary factors taken into account there. And that's a problem, because when you deal with causation, you want to abstract out the primary cause. It's true the coronavirus may be the primary cause of the fatality, but the precursors could be cardiovascular fitness, other diseases that are subsurface that haven't manifested to the point. And the coronavirus then becomes the final factor, admittedly regrettable, but again, it would not play out in people that have strong immune systems possibly, or no pre-existing conditions. I think Italy was the example of that. There were a lot of pre-existing conditions involved there. The last stat covers those who have recovered. What about people that just never submitted themselves to the health system? I know that if I got this, until I just would not want to go public with it. Depending on the severity, I am isolated. I'm not infecting anyone. I would not intend to. I would not go out, but I would try to just sort of nurse myself back to health, and let it go unrecorded, because I don't want to get swept up into the health care system at this point. I think there's more risk of me being immersed in indoor air in a hospital and other types of infections. I think my home is safer. So what do you think? These are just kind of my own reflections at this point. I can't prove anything that I'm saying, but these are just reasonable factors that I think will be considered in much greater detail as history unfolds.
Yeah, Ken, and to reiterate for everybody here, what we are is a group of 3 intuitors that come from different centers, psychologically speaking, the mind, will, and the emotions. But we are all dot connectors, the 3 of us here, and so we're giving you that information not to prove anything, because we don't believe we're making any airtight cases, but we're just kind of serving as an information filtering source to tell you what hit our radars, and hoping to trigger your own personal research. And one of the things along the lines of actually two things I want to point out about coronavirus that really seem significant to me. Coming out of the mental center, I process a lot of information, and sometimes it's hard for me to remember where I heard it or where I got it. But one of the things within the last couple of days was within the England or the United Kingdom, we have one of the key people, and there's a thread that I read from Alex Berenson, and he says, this is a remarkable turn from Niall Ferguson, who led the Imperial College authors who warned of 500,000 UK deaths, who has now himself tested positive for COVID, and he now says, blah, blah, blah. And what he's now saying is that the virus is a lot less lethal than they had originally managed, and and the reason they know that is because they have evidence that it was widespread long before they thought it was in various places, and many people had mild cases of it. And of course, what that means is that many people are resistant to it much more than previously thought. So they've vastly scaled down their original estimates of this global pandemic based on the fact that it's been out there for longer than they thought and isn't killing the levels of people that they thought. So that's a very interesting data point to me, and included within that little article or Twitter thread is also the mention that even though this mandatory, I'll say, social distancing hasn't been in operation in England until as of yesterday, 2 days ago, so 3 days ago now, he's launching the narrative, the scientist is, that it's the social distancing that broke the power of the virus. Well, it's way too early to know that, but already they're putting that narrative out there. And that's another of the purposes that we're trying to point out to you here, is that when we see a news narrative in operation or launching, we want to call your attention to it. Say, okay, this narrative may be true, it may not be, but we see a pattern that news is getting packaged to sell a particular trajectory, a particular road we want you to go down. So, and whether it's a truth narrative or whether it's an ulterior motive, not necessarily good motive, we try not to say, but we do want to know the truth. So anyway, yeah, he's actually saying that that the virus victory has been won, and this is happening in England, that they're saying that. Now, the guy that is posting this thread is an American that found this information, but not in American news sources. So this information about the virus being widespread, but not killing a lot of people, therefore a lot less damaging, that's not getting press in America. But if you're in the alternative media, you can find that information. And to be frank, a lot of us knew that in the beginning. We knew that this was not as lethal as it was being made out to be, and a lot of the panic was being force-fed. It was being driven. They want people to panic. They wanted the government shutdowns. And that's one of the things that we see coming out, is that there's a lot of desire for the anti-Trump forces to have Donald Trump fail, primarily economically, because they know that will enable him to be removed from the office. And of course, we're talking about swamp creatures. We're talking about the people that have made government their home, and not in a good way, in a way of that they're actually being parasites on the rest of the people by continual government bloat and far worse things. So the other little tweet that I wanted to mention in terms of packaging into conceptual frameworks what's happening with coronavirus and this whole pandemic and scare thing, is a tweet from Dwayne Cates, who is Soul War with a cross, and he's interacting with Laura Ingraham, and he says in this one particular tweet, there's three choices. If it's a natural outbreak, then oopsie, we overreacted. 2, if it's an accident from a bioweapon lab, oops, we didn't know what we were dealing with because the communists wouldn't cooperate. So that narrative has been covered. And then possibility 3, if it was deliberately released, it was an attack, a slow motion 9/11, and the president is moving with all of his power to marshaling all the forces to fight it. So the president has made sure that whatever the options are, each of those narratives is covered. We don't know which narrative is going to eventually capture the popular interest, but multiple narratives are being put out there to cover this. So I'm not sure if Cindy has anything to add to the whole coronavirus.
I do, as a matter of fact. When you were talking about the Brits, I just wanted to touch on this, and we tweeted this from our Poli-Psych Twitter account this morning. It's kind of known that, we've all heard of chloroquine, and Ken has done a really great job of covering that on our Twitter account from the very first moments it was mentioned. Chloroquine is a man-made version of quinine, which is found in tonic water. And of course, everyone who has ever been to England knows that the British drink a lot of gin and tonics. I would venture to say that is kind of their national drink. Or if you've watched Agatha Christie movies, you also would know that, or read Agatha Christie novels. And I've been wondering whether one of the reasons the UK has been able to scale down their attack on coronavirus and deemed it less threatening is perhaps because people in the UK have a certain degree of natural immunity to the coronavirus because they drink tonic water in their gin. And I know that, that might sound like a bit of a reach, but sometimes we're not fully aware of the implications of the decisions that we make every day about our diet, what we eat and drink. And I think it's possible that this is why the Brits have fared better against coronavirus than many other nations.
Yeah, I even saw a cartoon about that.
It's interesting. Well, Boris, I guess, has it too, or at least has tested positive. Well, Boris, as I mentioned earlier, he tested positive for coronavirus, but I think if they had also run a test on the other 1,000 pathogens, that I don't know where that ends up. We'll see. Hopefully, Boris pulls through, and I think maybe he did have symptoms. That's the other. I mean, we have to look at both sides. I guess generally testing people with symptoms. But again, the symptoms are so similar to lots of other common illnesses that in a given population, you'll have a certain fairly large amount of people who are suffering from serious cold, the conventional flu, etc.
Well, Ken, you said that you wouldn't go to seek medical treatment if you believed that you were ill with coronavirus. I heard Governor Cuomo this morning stating that 80% of people who do indeed contract the virus don't require any kind of medical aid. They just need to, it's a virus, you recover from a virus unless you have some other issue. And the 20% who need to be hospitalized, he gave the percentages of how many were likely to recover, how long it was likely that they would have to be in hospital, and so on. Of course, he's examining those statistics in the context of letting people know what kind of facilities they need for hospital care. But yeah, it's very true. 80% of people who contract the virus just are able to stay at home and recover, as you, Ken, said that you would do. So I think
I might contact my GP, just for consultation, but I know him well enough where I could say that I nevertheless do not, I would assert my right to remain in my own home, not disturbing anyone, and, self-recovering. But I wouldn't want to get swept up into the health system and end up in a, yellow suit in in some tank somewhere in the hospital. It's, especially if I live in a fairly large metropolitan area, but not New York City. So, even if I was there, I don't know how many New York City people want to be swept up into their hospital system. It's got to be a zoo. It's just so large, just massive amount of concentration of illness of all types. And we've all heard horror stories about hospital admittance.
Well, sure. And if you're right in your theories about ventilation systems and closed atmosphere systems, certainly that applies to hospitals more than just about it. I mean, hotels, maybe apartment buildings,
right.
But
I don't have to prove it. But I can act upon it. So, everyone in my family has heard this, I bent everybody's ear about this, and they don't know either, but they're not going to any public gathering areas. My mother lives in a nursing home setting, but in a separate detached dwelling. And I said right away, no cleaning, people, just open the windows a little bit and get some exercise, but don't let anybody in your place at all. She has her own central air handler. Air handler is the key thing with this theory. Well, let's move on to the economy. Don, you had some thoughts.
Well, before we go there was one more thing, and that's that I did want to give people a heads up that there is a certain individual who goes by Dr. Sam Muggsy on Twitter that is breaking information with regard to Dr. Fauci, and it's a little too early to say what's really going on there, but I would encourage people to look into this, Dr. Fauci's background, and I'm not saying that it's credible, so I don't want to put us out into too far out into the fringe area, but I'm just saying that this is something for people to look into.
Well, say that in your tweet, when you retweet, and I think that's the biggest function of alternative media. I think it's almost a duty for people to become citizen journalists in these cases, because the media barrier is just unbelievably difficult to transcend. But this neural network of information it's fascinating. And the fact that we can share this, hashtag it, catalog it, it just creates this mind hive of information, especially with links. And that means people can frictionlessly, follow a hyperlink and get right there without having to put it on your to-do list. And you know how those lists go sometimes, especially lately.
Yeah, and another tweet says Trump's top coronavirus doctor and this is true, and this is this is actually a Newsweek story. Well, I hesitate by saying true and Newsweek in the same sentence, but this is a mainstream article. Okay, so So the headline is in Newsweek, Trump's top coronavirus doctor called for health emergency fund back in 2017 and warned that the U.S. would face a surprise outbreak. Now, when you say surprise and you predict it, to me, just connect two very obvious dots. I'm not going to take it any further than that, but I'm beginning to be very suspicious of this guy. And be prepared for 10 days of darkness just in case that happens. We don't know what that means. I personally don't think that means the entire internet is going to be down for 10 days, although I will speculate that perhaps certain social media might. So, and we don't even know for sure if the whole 10 days of darkness thing is really even going to happen, because a lot of stuff that Q talks about, and that comes from Q, actually is more intended as a feint, or a fake out to get the deep state to do stuff that they might not otherwise do. So we don't know, but there's also the saying that from Q that it will be biblical. We don't know what that means, but we are thinking of biblically what happened right before the Passover. So just think about that. There was some darkness involved in that. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean it's art. I look at Q. I think there's definitely some artistry involved in that, and it's just one of those. It's probably the most interesting way to convey news that's ever been, at least in our in modern times, that's ever been crafted. I mean, it automatically makes the viewer or listener have to supply their own thinking to it, and it's like giving somebody a little puzzle to do, and it doesn't matter if it's true or not. It's just you've engaged the listener, and just everything. I see things all that. I just saw another one, the Easter, and then you have the rabbit. Follow the rabbit.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
But who knows? But it's it's what makes life worth living sometimes in these situations, just to have a little creative spark going.
It's easier to do. It's easier to use the imagination than to not use it when you're an intuitive, which might explain to some sensors in our audience how we make some of the leaps that we make. But
while we're on the topic, and I'll try to be brief, is that it still functions in the sensor, but it's subconscious, and this is how brainwashing works. Is you can get in there and wire people's intuition and associate Trump with pussy hats and do sort of plug in all these neural connections. And if you're a sensor, your intuition is subconscious, and sometimes if you're an intuitive, your sensing is subconscious too. I mean, that's why some intuitives get labeled as space cadets, or they can't remember where they put their shoes or whatever, and so there's this sort of compensatory thing going on between sensors and intuitives. It's one of the most fascinating differences between people. Yeah,
just one final observation on that before we move on to the economy is that if I were deep level military and I knew that there were traitors in government, and I knew that that the mainstream media had been captured by those same traitors that, by the way, JFK warned about in his speech regarding it's called The President and the Press, so I would encourage everybody to look up that speech on the internet and watch it. It's well worth watching. But if I knew all that and I was in the military and I wanted to get through to the people, I would have to come up with something like Q. It's almost obvious if you think about the ingredients. The military knows the level of betrayal. The military knows that the networks have been captured by the enemy. The military needs to get through to the people, but the military can't divulge classified information. So you have to incorporate plausible deniability. And I believe that that's a recipe that gets you Q, and it's almost predictable that this would happen.
I think radio silence. I mean, there's some things in flying that came up in my family that the concept of not clogging up the channel with a lot of it's this and the and all these other words. So the concise communication is really important. I think it's sort of trained into people, and it's a great way. It's why the posting and why Twitter is such a great discipline too, because you have to actually count and master the art of brevity, which may not be apparent here from this show, but Yeah, we're going to do a 10-minute show, and what do we have, 30 minutes?
I am not even looking at the clock. I don't want to get frustrated.
Moving on to the economy. One of the things that is happening, of course, is the stock market has fallen off the cliff. It may be climbing back up again. A little bit too early to get overly optimistic about that. But, and again, of course, we know that the economy isn't controlled by the stock market, although in the past the media has led us to believe that the stock market is an indicator of the economy. But we do know that as a result of this coronavirus, I would say not the virus itself, but the sequestering of people from one another as recommended and often even enforced, that has had a serious toll on the grassroots real economy. And I think all of us, and probably most of our listeners, have people that have been affected by that. And there is an emergency relief bill that has been approved for $2 trillion that is approved by Congress finally after Democrat shenanigans. We don't want to forget to mention that this bill was battled for, and the battle has been won. Now, it doesn't mean there's not any pork in there. There probably is some, but this is something that major is happening with the economy now, and that's the main point, is we are, there is a shift going on right now, and many people like, hat tip to X22 Dave, he has been highlighting this for like forever, that there is going to need to be a switcheroo in the economy where President Trump has been transitioning in the background to something that is more Main Street friendly as opposed to Wall Street friendly, and it has been happening in the background with trade deals and a lot of other things, and that may be what we see this this rapid decline in the stock market as being a signal toward or a rebooting point. And there are certain people that have been looking at forever for this type of an event to happen, a big rapid decline in the stock market and a rebooting. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and I'm going to say that those people are going to be disappointed in what is going to happen next, because I don't think it's going to be the big reveal and the immediate transfer to a gold standard that they've been wanting and expecting. My dot connectors, my intuition is telling me that this is going to happen over a much longer period of time. And yes, I do believe that gold is real money and will be a long-term good investment, but there's going to be bumps in this road and we're not going to get there overnight, because the good guys that I believe are now operating behind the scenes in helping President Trump know that the transition in order to work has to be reasonably smooth, and the old system was not introduced real rapidly. It was engineered over a slow period of time to get us onto this petrodollar that many people call the fiat money system. And it's going to take a while to come off of. So there are going to be bumps in the road, and people like Bill Holter are going to be probably disappointed. Although Bill Holter, James Sinclair, they've been talking about two resets for a long period of time. That one's going to be a fake reset, and one's going to be the real thing that will happen second. I'm going to put it in slightly different terms. I'm going to say that what we have happening probably now or very soon is going to be a deep level reset, and then the popular level reset that will actually change things for the average person is going to come later. So two resets, but at two different levels. And I think that's the way, if my reading of deeper history is correct, that's the way it's always happened. Then agreements are come to between nations and between powerful backers of nations, even families or single individuals. And this time in history is not going to be any different. The people that are Americans that wanted a big reveal and an implementation and a takeover by the common people of the narrative of the control of the financial wealth of nations, I think they're going to be disappointed, because I think we are going to have international deals that are not known at the popular level, just like we all have throughout history, and that later on down the road, we are going to have an unveil that is going to be at the popular level. So I do think that is in process. And that's just my dot connecting hunches at work. And I do believe that we're getting great clues from people. Got to single out X-22 Dave. He's outstanding in that regard. And then, but people, I think, like Gregory Mannarino was one, who are basically saying that we've lost the United States, that something nefarious has happened in our economy is, I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I'm getting this, kind of a signal along these lines somewhat from him, somewhat from other people interacting on Twitter and whatnot, that are basically saying the United States is not going to be a capitalist nation anymore because something bad is happening that we don't see and we don't understand. And I'm not going to jump to that conclusion, definitely. I think something is happening behind the scenes, but I don't think it's taking us away from capitalism. I think it's helping us get back to a true free market economy. And I do believe that Ron Paul, who is one of the voices I'm referring to, that's been talking about this for a long time, I believe that when he said that capitalism should not be blamed because we haven't had capitalism, he's spot on, exactly correct. The private control of the monetary system is not capitalism, and that's what we've had with the Fed. So there is a lot of information out there about that, but I do believe that the solution is being worked on at an international level, because we do have essentially a global economy now. That doesn't mean we're going to be a one world government, but there has to be agreements between nations that have to do with the national monetary systems so that there is a fair and level playing field. If you remember Donald Trump's inauguration speech, he talked about exactly that as one of the things that is going to be one of his primary goals. And I do think it is going to have to be a two-term operation to bring this whole thing to pass down to the popular level. So that's a lot to chew on, but I think that that's pretty much how I see the current situation. So what I would encourage people to stay strong and to trust that this is all going to be worked out for good, that there is an economic stabilization that's going to be happening, and part of the big first step is getting that money into the pockets of people on the street that have had their jobs and employment affected by the coronavirus pandemic, and I believe that it's all going to turn out for good.
How I'd always heard people say that the TARP money should have gone to the people, and it kind of did vanish into thin air a little bit. It just was never accounted for. There was I remember this one clip of Liz Warren, just not sure where it went, and she's in the Senate, so she should know. And this may also be an inflationary event. Money printing is almost always regarded in that over time, which would shrink the deficit down. So but it's better than a war. How much did Iraq cost and what did that accomplish? So the war itself is directed towards strengthening the defenses, the populist, self-identity of the U.S. rather than the globalist dominance of commodities. But the fall in the oil, though, that's another factor, and that's still left to play out. I think we're below $30 a barrel, which is that used to be the commodity before gold, or after the gold standard was abandoned, and now we're gold is strengthening definitely, and it's an internationally recognized archetype, and but it's still a system in flux, and I guess we'll have to see what happens. What are you thinking, Cindy?
The two of you may already be aware of this, but this happened since I plugged into my computer to start recording. House gives final passage to $2 trillion coronavirus stimulus bill. So the House, I knew the Senate had passed it, but this is fairly recent development. According to Yahoo News, within the last hour.
Yeah, I was actually alluding to that in some of the things I said earlier, but I didn't have a screenshot of that, so thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
8 trillion, that's chump change.
Yeah, right. Well, we've heard that the entire package is 10 trillion. I'm not sure if everything that's actually going to be done is enumerated in this bill, but I have little doubt that the president will sign this pretty quickly. So everybody that's waiting for a check, hopefully they're saying within 3 weeks as of yesterday. So I know we've joked a little bit about the coronavirus. I really don't want to make light of it too much because some people really are sick. Some people really are suffering. Some people are really suffering from this economic pinch. And I think we can all imagine if someone is, we've been told for how many years that we're supposed to have a service economy. And all these people who have moved into service jobs are now unemployed. And most wait staff receive more in tips by a substantial amount than they do from their paycheck. So these people who have not been working, the wait staff who have not been working, some of them are probably really in some dire straits financially. And when you're young, you have that type of a job. It's typically, there's not a whole lot of money saved up in the bank. So these checks that are coming to people are really and truly desperately needed, I believe, by some in the service industry. So hopefully they will get out soon. And thank you, Senate, Congress, and Mr. President, when you sign, for being sensitive to the needs of the American people.
I hope they really look into the water vapor thing, because there's an air handler could be fashioned with some method of not necessarily filtration, but something to eliminate the viral agent, especially this specific viral agent from the indoor air, because I think that will be where it goes. The coughing and sneezing, I think, is really not getting there, because every breath we exhale is really just a slow motion cough. And granted, you can hear a sneeze, you can hear a cough, but the breath thing is it's a perceptual anomaly. And I don't know, I think indoor air is going to become, if they can conquer that problem, I think the state of normalcy may actually return once that's realized, because something is spreading this, and I don't think it's handshakes, and it's too virulent to be that. It's something more ubiquitous, and I think it's in the breath that we take.
Yeah, especially considering how many people in New York City are becoming ill, and what makes them unique, the fact that they live in pretty close quarters with shared ventilation systems.
And the one thing I don't want to forget to point out is that we have in previous shows is that there isn't a correlation with the coronavirus, CV-19, and 5G. There is something that happens to water vapor with that particular, especially at high power, the 5G wireless carrier signal that does something with water vapor. And I've heard that from the beginning, of people that have concerns about 5G. So there's something going on there.
And I think I am moving into, at this point, the information that we have about everyone's favorite candidate for president. Not really, but Joe Biden.
Sleepy Joe.
Joe Biden floundering a bit on camera, but still very much being put out there as supposedly the one who's going to be the standard bearer for the Democrats in the 2020 presidential election. And there have been rumors that the 2020 Democratic National Convention might be canceled. They're saying no plans to cancel yet, but Democrats mull contingency plans for July convention. What do you suppose that could be? Anybody want to take some bets on whether we have a brokered convention? And one thing that I'm showing the tweet now, a lot of people have been mentioning, is what a celebrity Governor Cuomo has become. And I have to say that I myself have watched quite a bit of his speeches, because it's, sometimes waiting for the president to come on, the national team to come on and comment. It's interesting to listen to Governor Cuomo. Not that I would ever become enamored of him as a presidential candidate, but some people might be. Some people might, we all are aware of how well the president is doing in polls, probably partly having to do with his stepping up as kind of the hero that's going to save the day. And if someone else is able to place himself or herself in a similar position of being a hero, it could be helpful to them in their polling numbers. And I haven't, until this coronavirus crisis, I haven't heard anybody mention Cuomo as a possible dark horse that might step into the presidential election at the last minute. But there is speculation now that he may be, and it's a possibility.
Yeah, I'd say Hillary is out.
Well, you got to remember his brother Fredo was in the news.
Yeah.
Why is Hillary out? I didn't know.
I don't know. It just seems like at this point, the health issue is becoming a pretty big deal, and just in general, I think if Joe goes, I think it would really be a landmark turning, changing of the guard, so to speak. And I can't see Joe making it much longer. The frequency of the events that we're noticing will increase. I've seen this before, and they tried this strategy with Mueller, and I mean, he just literally failed during the questioning in front of the was it the House or the Senate? I don't know. I think it was in the House when they called him before the Select Committee. Anyway, but it's not. I think people will tire of it. They just can't keep this up. That's my personal feeling for the tide turning.
Well, I do think that the idea of a closed convention is a possibility. I actually think the Dems would probably welcome the excuse to do something like that and to take the spotlights of the alternative media off. The less accessible everything becomes to the grassroots, then the more control they have through their chosen media outlets. So I really do see a scenario, I don't think this is going to happen, but I think the Democrat Party as such really would like to get their control back from the grassroots and manage the outflow of information, because at this point it's a PR disaster.
Now, the anti-Trump movement is still pretty strong, though, so I'm detecting that there's no let-up there in the compensatory anti-sentiment, which people tend to use to justify and look the other way with Joe Biden's situation. And that's strong in this area. But in the introverted atmosphere of the voting booth, even the people that may socially, or even in a survey answer a question a certain way will revert to their inner perception, and that's why voting is private. I think it makes you have substantial contact with your choice, rather than the extroverted social justice warrior oriented virtue signaling that goes on.
What's your opinion, Ken, of the possibility of mail-in ballots and ramping that up? Because I see that as breaking now as a Democrat strategy. I see feelers going out there that they want to be able to vote by mail. If even people are afraid of going to the voting booth because of coronavirus, actually thinking that it could last that long, which I don't. But I do see that narrative is beginning to be pushed out there, that Democrats would like a lot of people to vote by mail.
I don't know. That's it's still in flux. I think it really depends on the public perception of the risk, and that could go either way. We still don't know. We're speculating that it's indoor air, or it's it's being overblown, but it's still a danger. And if you're zeroing in on one demographic category, there's a tremendous amount of voters over the age of 70 that are definitely in a risk group. So you're going to be, I think you're right. I think the mail-in will become, it's probably a done deal at this point. It's just not enough time for this to recede. There's not enough time for a trial of a vaccine, if that is the right answer, but it would psychologically be the right answer. I don't know if they would compel people to get it, but I think you'd almost find uniform compliance in the older 75 and up demographic. It's just that they are generally positively disposed toward virus as being a constructive thing, or virus. I mean a vaccine against a virus. The rest of us, I guess, maybe what I said is a Freudian slip. Get immunity from very slight exposure, and I think that might start to happen because, again, I think many more people have been exposed to this than can be counted, and because it's in the air, if my theory is correct, which means we would slowly build up an immunity. Your body basically sees this pathogenic virus, and it's like, what's this all about? With the other 1,000 that we get exposed to every day, you can be in the same room with someone with a cold or the flu and not get it, but you're still getting how many does it take? How many strands of DNA does it take to kick the bucket over physiologically? I don't know. No one knows, but you could have 10 or 20 or 30 strands. Maybe that'll even show up on a test, but your body would eventually become inured to that, the presence of that pathogen. And that might start to slowly, develop. And we don't know. I mean, we're going to be books written about this time, and we're still writing it.
Well, I got to point out that your theory about the water vapor does really coincide with what came out from that doctor in the UK, from that tweet that I read earlier, and why they're shutting down, is that they did come to the conclusion that a lot more people had been exposed than they previously thought, which means that it's actually less lethal than previously thought, even though we know that that it is more lethal for those infected than typical flu. So I don't want to actually use that narrative personally, that it's just another flu bug, because it is something different. It is something new, but I do think that it is more widespread, and it's probably the water vapor air system thing that you had talked about. So those coincide.
And now, if we have exhausted those topics, which of course we haven't.
Back to coronavirus again.
Yeah, I know. It is almost inevitable.
All roads lead to coronavirus.
To the curious, the seekers, and the experts, thank you for joining us for this presentation of Poli-Psych Podcast. We hope that you are staying well and safe, and that you have plenty of toilet paper. We also hope that you have enjoyed this presentation. And if you have enjoyed it, we ask you to please click like for the video, subscribe to us on YouTube, subscribe to us on BitChute. And if you don't want to miss a thing, subscribe to us and follow us on Twitter. If you have a moment, please visit our website. Again, thank you for joining us, and until next time, take care.